All right, let's take Scott in South Carolina. Scott has been trying to call in, has been very diligent about it, and wants to talk about why some people look at evidence for God and accept it and others don't. So, Great question. Scott, welcome to the show.
Hey, Eric and V, how are you?
Doing good. Excited to talk with you again. Thanks for trying so hard to get on today.
Yeah, we saw you kind of dropping out over and over. We're like, what's going on?
I'm not going to comment. I was having technical difficulties.
We understand. We feel your pain.
Yeah, have you seen the show?
It's all user error. So.
Oh my goodness, that's okay. What can we help you with today? What's your question?
Well, that's my question. Last time we spoke, Eric, you asked if I could call back and we could talk about the idea of man's sinful nature, and I want to have that conversation.
Oh,
but I wanted to ask you guys. But I wanted to ask you this question for some time now. And it's a genuine question. It's not a setup for me to give you my answer. Mm-hmm. I really do wonder, through 2,000 years of Christian history, people certainly smarter than me, have been atheists and have weighed the evidence and have completely committed themselves to the Christian idea. Mm-hmm. Most notably, in my mind, because I'm a big fan, is C.S. Lewis. Was an atheist till he was in his 30s, and finally couldn't deny the evidence. So that's my question to you. Why do some see the same evidence and believe, and others, like yourselves, I'm assuming, see the evidence and say that's not good enough?
So it's funny you should bring up C.S. Lewis. I took an entire class at my Christian college on the Inklings. And so I actually know the story of what Lewis says is the night that he converted, or at least began truly considering it. He was on a midnight walk with Tolkien. And Tolkien was a Catholic, as we know. And he and C.S. Lewis were debating about the existence of God. And C.S. Lewis says, it's just myth. Like, we are just, it's myth. And Tolkien says, but where do the myths come from?
Bum, bum, bum.
And that's what convinced him, allegedly, according to Lewis, was that question. That's what got him. And to me, that's not very good evidence, right? Like, I'm not saying he's not smart. I think that he was brilliant. He was a professor, and had just like the Oxford community there every day, like brainstorming amazing story ideas. But that's what got him. And that's kind of the crux of how I would answer your question, which is the evidence doesn't matter. It's not about what convinces the individual person apart from that person. It's how certain kinds of evidence hit a person at a time in their life when that is convincing to them, and everything that leads up to that. We were talking with Elle earlier. I don't know if you were on the line to listen to it, but she was in a very vulnerable, insecure place, and this crazy-ass vampire cult comes out of nowhere and tells her what she needs to hear. They didn't have really good evidence. We went through that. It was really bad evidence, but she was in a place where that bad evidence was good enough for her to buy into it. So I think a lot of the time we have these conversations in a very scientific way where it's, well, let's look at this evidence and see, does it fail? Does it stand up to these tests? And we can certainly do that. There's certainly value there. But a lot of the time when you see somebody who is convinced by a thing or unconvinced by a thing, it has less to do with that thing itself than it does that person and how they are engaging with that evidence, and whether or not they are looking at it through a skeptical lens, whether or not they are looking at it with knowledge of where it comes from or the history of the thing, right? So that would be my answer. I would not look at the evidence as much as the person when asking this particular question.
Can I add to that?
Absolutely. I would love to hear your side of it.
Okay, so I know that I can rely on the chat to talk about evidence and what qualifies it as evidence, but I kind of want to help give people some language to use to move forward in having this conversation with each other. What V was pointing out was the difference between ontology and epistemology. and I've talked about it before, but I want to bring it up every chance I get because people are still just finding the show and are learning about it. So
apparently someone didn't know we were engaged until last episode.
Yeah, we've been engaged for a long time. Like you proposed, we live together.
Yeah.
We own a house, but we don't know. We're in a home, and we have a home together.
We own a house? No, we don't.
No, we don't. We don't own a house. We're renting. Anyway, but what I was going to say is ontology is the study of what is, right? If you want to talk about whether or not something is true, you compare it to what matches with reality, and you come to ontological understandings and or agreement on that ontology. But what V is pointing out is epistemology, and that's the study of how we know what we know. Mm-hmm. And so if you were talking to somebody who had a very different epistemology and provided the exact same ontological evidence, but they have a different method of evaluating that evidence, then they're going to come up with that different conclusion, right? So
yeah, you're asking me.
I'm just making sure that you're kind of in agreement, or if you're like, oh my gosh, I can't wait for Eric to shut up so I can jump in and tell him he's wrong.
I absolutely agree. Absolutely agree.
So then where we go from that is we kind of need to compare our epistemologies, right? We need to compare and look at what tools are you using to evaluate the world around you that's leading to such a different conclusion than me. What values do you have? You know, and that's where it gets to axiology, right? It's you know, what should you be valuing?
Yeah.
And how are you making sure that you're applying that?
Right. You can make coffee in a coffee maker, and you can make coffee in a, I don't know, like the toaster. I don't know. I'm grabbing an analogy out of nowhere. It's not the coffee that's the problem. If it doesn't make coffee, it's where you're putting it, and like how you're synthesizing it. So like a lot of the times when you're seeing that, I know that wasn't great. It wasn't.
That's okay.
I haven't drunk all of my coffee yet.
No problem. Go ahead.
The point that I'm trying to make in a horrible way apparently is that sometimes, not always, sometimes. So we always have to look at the evidence itself, right? And determine, is this good evidence? Is this bad evidence? And then after that, you have to look at how it's being synthesized by the other person. Is that person in a place where they can actively look at that evidence and weigh it accordingly? And what methods are they using? And how are they synthesizing it? Because that is where bad evidence gets accepted, and that's where good evidence doesn't.
Yeah.
Okay, after all that, let me see if I understand exactly what you're saying, and because you sort of included C.S. Lewis in the same sort of category as our nice lady who was approached by, what were they, vampires, Satanists? I only caught the tail end of that.
Vampire sex cult.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't put them in that same category. And C.S. Lewis is just. I'm most familiar with his story than any other atheist, but I have heard accounts of doctors, biologists, people who look at that, for instance, the design of the human body or the design of the cosmos, and come to a point in themselves where they just can't deny the design of it and the order of it and the precision of it.
Wow!
And then you have others like Carl Sagan or a Stephen Hawking or Neil deGrasse Tyson, who can't see God in any of it, and I just wonder. And these are not slouchy people. These are well thought out, well reasoned, highly intelligent people, and it's fascinating to me that some see God in it, others can't.
Well,
won't.
Let's pick that apart, because the won't really weirds me out.
Well, yeah, it's the same as if we were saying some people don't see God in it, and some people absolutely will at all costs see God in it, right? Like there's the implication there that one is not being completely genuine.
If somebody is saying something very complex, and they say that's a complex thing, to say, oh well, this person can no longer deny the complex. Like, what the heck do you think we're doing? Do you think that Neil deGrasse Tyson is denying the incredible, properties of the universe around him? Do you think that Stephen Hawking was denying the vastness of space and the calculations that he did in it? Do you think that biologists who don't believe in your religion are denying that it's complex or amazing? Like, when you say they can't deny anymore, it sounds like what you're saying is they think, oh, well, maybe this is the case, but I'm going to deny it. And then when they when they do believe you, they can deny it no longer. Like, do you see how that really rubs weird?
Sure, it sounds really arrogant. I understand that.
Okay.
No, I get that, and certainly, I just think there's another factor that must be involved here, and that is the leap of faith that it takes to say there is a God, or whichever God they choose to believe in.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm Christian, and so that's where I've gone. But
absolutely. Here's the thing: when you look at something that seems very complex and you don't have an answer for it, that is no longer the realm of science. Science is, this is a complex thing. Let's figure out how it works. Let's figure out, what causes it, what doesn't cause it, what the implications are. Sure, that's science. When you look at that and you go, but how? How in the philosophical sense, why do we exist? Why is this here? You have gone outside the realm of science and you have taken what you call a leap of faith. And that is why it's very dangerous to point to scientists or doctors or anybody else as, authority figures about questions around God, one way or the other. We cannot do appeals to authority here, because once you get into those high ontological questions around why we exist and why we are here and what happened at the beginning of the beginning of the beginning of everything, that no longer has anything to do with whether or not you know what happens when two cells, rub together or what the fuck ever. It's no longer in your realm of expertise. You are making a personal claim based on your evidence, one way or the other. Again, we're going back to, is this evidence at all? Sure, it's evidence. Now you're building on a personal level of philosophical inquiry. And some people do that and say there is no God. Some people do that and say there is a God. And some people say, I'm not going to do that. I don't know. And to say, well, there are scientists on both sides. Sure, of course there are. Of course there are. But it has nothing to do with the science. At this point, it's not about a piece of evidence that proves or disproves it. It's, what do you do in your own philosophical musings with that piece of evidence? Right? So we want to avoid appeals to authority here, and we also want to make sure we're delineating between what you said, what is science, and what is that leap of faith. And why some people take it and some don't is a personal thing. That is the way maybe they grew up, or maybe they heard something that was very compelling to them and they don't have an answer in the negative, and so they accept it. Like, whatever the case is, it's no longer about, oh, well, this person was a scientist. Okay, that doesn't matter. What we're talking about here is no longer their qualifications or how smart they are. And I don't want to give the impression that I think that people who believe in God are not smart or can't be scientists. That's a given. It's not about that. It's about putting that leap of faith on top of it, putting that philosophical inquiry above everything else and saying, okay, I'm going to make an assumption now. And asking why some people make an assumption and others don't is interesting, but it doesn't speak to the quality of the evidence.
Yeah, I'm not looking to scientists or scholars or, smarter people as the authority on the issue, just as examples. Because we could go to just common people and ask, why do some believe and some don't? I go to the intelligentsia simply because, and again, I hate to keep bringing his name up, but C.S. Lewis. What you described in his conversion was sort of the final domino that fell. There were a lot of considerations that he put in before that. It wasn't just that the myth, and what he described it was that this is a true myth. I think that's what Tolkien said to him. It wasn't just that domino. There was the whole idea of justice, and where does that come from? And fairness, where does that come from? And the
Right.
idea.
Yeah, but here,
I'm sure you read Mere Christianity in your class.
Right.
And,
For sure. I've been haunted by Lewis since going to college. But my thing here is that, do you realize that if you are arguing that, do we want to look at the quality of the evidence is what I'm asking. Because if we do want to look at the quality of the evidence as a reason that people believe, that is shitty evidence. It's essentially the no true Scotsman fallacy. Tolkien, as much as I love him, gave Lewis a no true Scotsman fallacy, and Lewis was like, okay, I guess that's the final nail in the coffin. They're myths. Well, this is a true myth. Oh, okay. That is a fallacy. It's a fallacious argument, and if that is what tipped him over the edge, then that was a bad reason. I'm not saying he was wrong. This is apart from whether or not he got the correct conclusion. He did that for a bad reason. So that just
if that was the only reason, but there's a mountain of evidence behind that.
No. Every single piece of evidence needs to stand on its own. You don't get to say, well, there are a bunch of things that are flawed that make it okay. If he is being convinced by things like the no true Scotsman fallacy, that throws a lot of doubt in my mind as to what other things he was convinced by. And it doesn't matter how far back that train goes. If there are fallacies in there, then it's very possible that he accepted really bad evidence and came to a wrong conclusion. Do you get where I'm coming from? This is not an attack on any one person. Lewis seems like a cool guy. In fact, I heard he was super kinky. It was awesome. But like the problem here is that we're having two different conversations at once. We're having, is the evidence good? And what do people do with that evidence, whether or not it is good? And in this case, the evidence that we have presented is not good. It's a fallacy. Whether or not there are fallacies in the back, we don't know. The thing that convinced him is a fallacy. And whether or not he accepted that speaks to how reliable he is as a person who can synthesize good evidence. If that was what convinced him, that throws doubt on the other things that convinced him. So we're coming at this in two different ways, and I'm trying to like straddle both horses at once. I don't want to confuse you, but do you see where I'm coming from?
I certainly do.
Okay.
I certainly do. I mean, we're going to disagree on the weight of the evidence, obviously, and any other evidences I could raise, which is the point of this call. But if I guess that was just my whole question was why do some believe and some don't? Why do some find the evidence compelling and some don't?
Yeah, it's epistemic.
I tend to think. I'm sorry. I tend to think personally that it comes down to a personal, well, for lack of a better term, a personal preference.
Really?
I think some people. Yeah. Does that sound simplistic?
No. I it's not simplistic. I just disagree with it entirely. So if you were convinced of a thing, I hope that you would, have good reasons for being convinced of the thing. But if you're convinced of the thing, could you just choose to no longer be convinced? I don't think you can.
No.
I don't think preference.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think preference comes into it. I think that you are kind of
animal.
You're kind of beholden to your epistemic toolbox. You're relying on your understanding of the world around you to build the clearest picture of the world around you. So I don't think preference has anything to do with it. Yeah.
Well, I think when it comes to God, that's a different animal than if we were considering other things.
Why?
Because we have, and this is what I guess we could morph into our sinful nature conversation for next time. But
you're just like a matryoshka doll. I said it correctly this time. You're like a matryoshka doll of good topics. We just kind of pop you open and there's another good topic inside. And like we're just digging so deep that I feel like we need to write out a tree of different, like I want you to call in and talk about what evidence, maybe a specific piece of evidence that you are convinced by or you think we should be convinced by.
Or I want to make sure that we don't lose the good stuff we're talking about in this call on the next call. So what I would like to see personally, if you want to go the evidence route, we absolutely can. But I don't get the sense that that's really where you're your question lies. I want to know why God plays by different rules and why we should believe that. Because if you can convince us that God, like the concept of God, proving God, believing in God, plays by different rules than believing in and accepting other things, then we can have the conversation about...
Like what?
Yeah.
Just to give him an example so that he can...
Well, yeah, you just said we're beholden to our epistemic toolbox. We do not have a choice. And Scott says, I believe that is different for God. God is a different animal to all of these other things.
Oh, got
And that's what I want to dive into next time because it will tie into this call. But I'm getting the sense, Scott, that it has something to do with our quote-unquote sinful nature as well.
Well, I definitely believe that. I believe, and the Bible is real clear on this, which is where I get my authority on this, is that every human being is predisposed to not, if not believe in God, at least not to pursue Him, and so we're predisposed to find other ways to go. And
I think that's weird. I think that's weird. I honestly, it just sounds like a way to excuse, well, you're just predisposed to not believe me.
Yeah, I frankly don't see how that can be taken in any way that is not insinuating that we are either lazy or dishonest, frankly. Yeah. And I know that that's not what you're implying because you seem like a nice person who takes us at our word and we're doing the same for you. But when you talk about this next time, think about what it's sounding like on the other side, because either you're saying you have not pursued correctly or enough, or you have, and you're lying to yourself and other people about it. So we're kind of in a bind there, but I'm curious to hear how you're going to answer that next time you call in.
Yeah. Thank you for calling, Scott. It is always fun to talk to
guys.
you.
Okay.
I enjoy it.
Bye.
Take care.
Okay, bye.
So many things I want to talk. So if you're a believer,
he is getting better at holding to one topic though, which is good.
He is. If you're a believer and you want to see these conversations had more than just when Scott calls in, you need to call us. Like, we want more believers to call in so that we can have these discussions, because we don't want to create straw men that we're going to then attack. It's important to have the dialogue and show how to have the dialogue in a positive, productive way.
Yeah.
That said, I said matryoshka, and apparently I mispronounced it now. So I said babushka, and I got emails and messages and every different. It's called a matryoshka doll. You need to quit calling it a babushka doll. Okay, fine. I called it, and now my pronunciation. I'm sorry. Look, I'm trying, you guys. Okay.